People gathering around, and then they go to JoJo's and Caribou.
Good evening. I'm Vice Chairman of the Burnsville Economic Development Commission. My name is Gene Grisini, and on my right is Rich Vanderlen, Kevin Sturts, and Roger Kleppe. Okay, we're going to get started with I need a motion of the adoption of the agenda.
To me.
So move. Second? Okay. No discussion. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. I need another motion for approval of the minutes from September 12th, 2012, which we received via email. Do we have a motion for approval of those?
So
Kevin? Or Commissioner? Sturts, excuse me. And a second?
I second.
Okay. Mr. Klepp. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Open our business forum. And I think that's for guests, is it not?
Yes.
We do not have any guests today, so we'll move forward. Okay, review the MRQ Tax Increment Finance District Number 7. Jenny Faulkner, I believe you're presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm going to just kind of give a highlight of this. We included the information in your background. We don't do this very often at the city. This will be our 7th one, hence TIF District Number 7. So we're creating a tax increment financing district in the Minnesota River Quadrant area. This kind of goes back certainly many years to the city's long-term vision to redevelop the Minnesota River Quadrant, but more specifically as it relates to TIF. Back in 2008, the city received special legislation to create a soils district in this area. The purpose of the TIF district and the special legislation was to address poor buildable soils. And when we say poor soils, they're not hazardous or contaminated. There's just usually like a lot of peat on there, so to be able to build building foundations, you have to dig out a lot of that dirt. There's also a lot of infrastructure challenges in the Minnesota River Quadrant, and also certainly higher and better uses in its future, and we need to foster that redevelopment. So there certainly has been an evolution of things, and I think I spoke to this a couple meetings ago with you and updating things going on in the MRQ. And as you know, 13 and 5 will be starting construction next year. It's a 2-year construction project. That's County Road 5. Of course, it says County Road 3. County Road 5 will be an overpass on top over Highway 13. So with that, there's an opportunity to capture and use some of that excess dirt, because Highway 13 will be dug down 10 to 20 feet lower than it already is now at that interchange. And that dirt is good dirt. So at the staff level, we started to ponder what are we going to do with that dirt. We know we've got areas of bad dirt, so the vision just kind of came together to be able to create the opportunity to use that good dirt that's going to be scooped out for the highway project and use it in the MRQ area to the extent we can, or at least create the opportunity for that, because it's right next door. And that will also save project costs on both ends, on any property owner that has bad soils that need to be corrected, because there will be dirt that's available to them a very short distance away, and it will also hopefully save construction costs on 13 and 5, because the transportation to get rid of that dirt is very close to the project. So before any of that work begins, we need to create the TIF district to be able to have the opportunity to capture any future development tax base. So there's a lengthy process that we've gone through, Skip and I have, with our Public Works Director, our EDA legal counsel, and the city's financial advisor. So I'm just going to highlight some of the criteria. Why did we pick the parcels that we did? The parcels that we picked are known to have known soil issues. So we had some soil boring information that we had worked with some property owners, and that's the parameters for the soil district. At least 80% of the total land in the district has to have poor soils, 20% cannot. So very limited in scope. Those parcels also need to meet what's called a 4-year knockdown rule. This is in any TIF district, there's a knockdown rule. And what that means is something has to happen on that property on the front end of the TIF district, as opposed to just doing speculative financing or speculative development. So a qualified activity needs to happen, and in this case it's related to the soil remediation. So we can start mining soil on any of these parcels, or we can stockpiling, or a combination of both, or we can have infrastructure improvements next to them, adjacent to them, on them. So that's the knockdown rule. So we picked parcels that were likely to meet that 4-year requirement. Then the final step in that was we looked at the redevelopment potential. Which parcels are most likely to redevelop in the near future? Because if they don't redevelop to create that increased value, there is no increment. So we tried to also select parcels that had the highest potential for redevelopment. And that leads us to the map. The area is shaded in black, and this was in your packet, and this is all part of the TIF plan that we've put together. Total of 26 parcels or 67 acres. They're all in the general area. They don't have to be directly adjacent to each other, but these are the parcels that we know to have bad soil conditions, highest potential for redevelopment, and meet all of the TIF rules, the 4-year knockdown rule. We can create a future TIF districts in the MRQ when that situation arises. It doesn't have to be a soils district. It can be other districts as well. So we're not locking ourselves in by that. And we can also modify the parcels in this district in the future if need be. Regarding the financials, that's the other half of this. Now that we know what parcels are going to be included, what does the financial situation proposed increment look like? We can defer increment collection for 4 years, which is what we're opting to do, because it's going to take a while for these soils to be corrected and for 13 and 5 to be redone. So we don't need the increment next year, so we're holding that off until 2017. Then the collection of any increment, which is an increase in tax base, will be collected for 20 years and put into the separate fund or until 2037. We do need to commit those funds within 5 years. And then we're noting that staff recommends fiscal disparities are paid within the district. Those that are fiscal disparities are tax revenues that go into a metro pool to offset commercial industrial development throughout the region. So that by having it paid within the district, it doesn't impact the general tax levy, because that check that we have to write doesn't come from the general tax levy. It comes from within this district. We're proposing the use of the funds be 1/3 for soil correction and 2/3 for infrastructure. And I've included in the packet just the relative sections related to the financials, and I'll just put the overview up here. With the parcels we've chosen, with some projected redevelopment scenarios, we project that there'll be about $13.9 million of increment generated over the 20 years beginning in 2017. You'll see the site improvements preparation costs, which is soil improvements, to be about $3 million, and then the infrastructure is under other qualifying costs at $5.9. The maximum amount the city can keep for administrative costs is 10%, and then you'll see interest expenses on there. So there's a note at the bottom here. Total amount of bonds to be issued, the most we could issue is $9 million. We don't have any plans at this time to do that, but once this district is created, the opportunity for the city to issue bonds for infrastructure or soil projects would be there. So with that, we are recommending that the EDC recommend approval of proposed TIF District Number 7 and the related TIF plan. Any TIF projects that come in, if there's any developers agreements that would be tied to this, certainly would come before this body in the future. If we were to do that, the plan doesn't preclude us from entering into a private development contract with a private property owner. But again, the overall intent is to deal with public infrastructure and then the soils issues. And I will stand for any questions.
Gentlemen, any questions for Ms. Falter?
I do. Would be, 2 questions. One was, obviously, this when you do this sort of remediation, it does increase the value of the land. So, were there, and how the parcels were selected? Were there other parcels that weren't selected that wanted to be part of this?
Commissioner Klepke, that's a good question. The city creates the TIF district to try to maximize the amount of TIF revenue that can be generated. We certainly engaged property owners to assess the soil condition of their property to meet the rules. It's not, a developer may not get a direct benefit by their property being in the TIF district. It just allows the city to capture that increment to use it for any of the specified purposes. So if we collect revenue off of these parcels, it's possible that none of the property owners would get any of that increment back to them as an incentive. So we didn't meet with all the property owners. We met with most of the property owners. Most of them know about a TIF district. They also know the purposes for public infrastructure and soil improvement. So outside of that, certainly I think we've met with some people or sent letters who weren't interested in participating at all in doing the soil borings and stuff. So we did send letters to the property owners, especially in the Lady Bird Lane area where we suspected that there were bad soils
Right.
in this area here. We
So if
invited
someone-
them to participate.
So if someone in this area wanted to participate, they had an opportunity to participate.
If I could, Mr. Chair, commissioners, you should separate the TIF parcels from the ability for any of the property owners down there to participate in a soil remediation program.
Okay, separate those two.
Separate those. There are a couple of parcels down there that only have limited soil issues that are not in the TIF district, but certainly could avail themselves of the 5 and 13 dirt and anything that we do to do the remediation. So those two things are not linked.
Sure.
Directly. And as Ms. Faulkner said, the prime purpose is the infrastructure improvements down there. And I think the assumption that staff has made, and all of the property owners that we've met with down there agree with us, the infrastructure improvements is what's really important to them. That will probably drive the development as much as the soil remediation will drive the development. If the soils are all clean but the infrastructure is still poor, it's not going to be a good area for development. So when you link those two together, that will in fact drive their development, and that's really, I think, what the property owners are more concerned about is the future ability to
And
develop.
we say infrastructure primarily sewer and roads, that kind of
Roads,
kind of
yes,
stuff? Okay.
yes.
Okay. And my next question was, maybe this is, you might not have the history of this, but in your other 6 TIF districts, how have your pro formas matched up to the actual, when you look at how close you are to your tax increment revenues?
Commissioners, that's a good question. I'm just kind of go off my memory here, and some of these were created well before my time.
Right.
But certainly TIF Districts 1 and TIF Districts number 2, which are the South Cross area. So 1 is south of 42, and I believe 2 is north of 42 in the South Cross area. Those have both exceeded projected revenues. Those one decertified, I think it was last year. Another one will decertify in 2013. Those excess revenues, when the last one's decertified, certainly will go to the general fund, so they have exceeded that. The city, I would say generally, and heart of the city is TIF District number 6. That's an active district. We are meeting our expectations so far on that. I think the revenue side might be a little bit lower because the development isn't there, but the expenditures, I don't think, exceeded the revenues at the time that they were made. So, and just because it's on here that, like I said, that we can issue bonds, that doesn't mean we will. So it just gives us the ability to do that if the increment is there.
Okay.
Very good questions.
Thank you.
And our other TIF districts commissioners are offline. They've all been decertified. We just have 2, 6
Yeah.
are the active ones.
5 actually never got certified. 5 was for the amphitheater. 4 was apothecary products down by the Pepsi plant, which obviously has been built. And I'm blanking on actually where 3 was.
That might have been the old amphitheater TIF district that was never,
No, that was 5.
that was 5? Yeah, I'm not sure. Unless it was a soils district, there was another district that was done off of Nicollet, north of Highway 13, that office park area.
Yeah.
That was an old soils district
Because
too.
3 and 4 were actually decertified before I got here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Sturts, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. So Jenny, help me understand. If we don't borrow money with bonds to do the soil remediation and infrastructure, how is that paid for?
I think there's a lot of funding sources that would be available. We may have some cash that's available. This gives us the opportunity to do bonds. I think it's likely that we would, but that decision hasn't been made yet for certain projects. On the soil remediation, our goal is to have the landowners do as much as they can on their own without the city writing a check for soil remediation. So with that, we amended the ordinance a month or so ago to allow private property owners to do mining in this area. And we have our first application in for an interim use permit to allow someone to do mining, and we're working on that agreement now. But part of that is that the city will they're going to be obligated to dig out so much of their bad soils per year. The city's going to commit to providing clean fill for them. So we hope that this would come from like 13 and 5 or maybe other city street projects, so we don't have to write a check for that. So we are very conservative. This is a very conservative TIF plan, I will tell you that, because we're trying to have the property owners in the private sector, we have the tools there for them to do as much as they can with not overcommitting the city, because the proposed development on this, we don't know what it is at this point. Until the roads are done, the soil is cleaned up, what's the market going to bear at that time? So when the time comes to do some of the infrastructure projects, or if we do have to spend money to buy dirt to fill a hole that we committed to, we certainly will have to do that analysis. So our financial advisors have advised to be realistic, but to have our TIF plan be as generous as possible so we don't have to go back and make modifications, even though we know the reality is our decisions may be more conservative.
Okay, so as you talk about it then, some of the remediation could happen basically for free in terms of the city's obligation, and then, of course, the roads and such the city would pay for, but that might come from other non-bonding sources.
It's possible.
Okay.
The infrastructure projects that we call out in the TIF plan, let me go back to the map. The biggest one that I believe I would anticipate, or if I had to guess right now, that we would go out for bonding for TIF bonding out of this district would be this intersection here at Cliff Road.
Yeah.
It's been a long-term plan to straighten this out so it would come to a T intersection here behind the the old Knox lumber right at the railroad tracks, and then you go directly east or directly west under 35W to straighten that out and get rid of this direct connection where I don't know if it's DuPont or 120th Street, comes right out onto the off-ramp. So that is a multi-million-dollar project, certainly primarily funded by the city. So that is what is called for in the TIF plan. We also have some other infrastructure that we call out. There's some stormwater ponding to occur. There's not a lot of ponding in this area, and quite frankly, the ability to do that with the amount of soil and where the bedrock is quite a challenge. So we're working on some ponding options over here and over here right now as part of the infrastructure costs here. And we may have some other funding sources that are a part of this as well. So,
Okay, thank you.
good questions.
Does any state or city own property down there? I mean, does the state or city or county own property down there?
I was going to say president, but it's chair. Chair Grazzini. Yes. As part of 13 and 5, governmental entities that primarily the county have purchased property down here. So there's a strip of land right where, here's the used car. So right behind there, and before you get to these nice office buildings, these newer office buildings here, there's a strip of land in here that I believe is currently owned by the state.
Yes.
That one's owned by the state. And then these other parcels here, the county is buying as part of 13 and 5, and they'll be tearing those buildings down. Any parcels that are left here, the county has agreed to have the city be the developer on those. We know more of the local environment. We have the local contacts with Skip and myself to be able to help foster some kind of redevelopment or reuse of any parcels that are left over there. So that's why we included these parcels, because they're closest to 13 and 5, and even though not all of these have bad soils, this one here does, these don't, we believe that they will redevelop. They'll be the first parcels to redevelop. So they're part of the 20% that we want to include, because we want to be able to create that increment to help pay for this project over here.
Commissioner Vanderleen, do you have a question?
No, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there any motion that we'd like to make at this time, gentlemen?
I would make a motion that the committee affirm staff's recommendation.
For the TIF number 7?
TIF number 7.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Commissioners.
Thank you very much.
Good luck.
Okay. My apologies. Our next is a review of draft legislative agenda, and I believe that's going to be the two of you.
That one's mine. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. As you know, each year, Council prepares a legislative agenda. The purpose of this is, number one, the agenda is actually presented in January to our legislators to establish for them where the city stands on various issues that may come before them. By establishing the agenda, it also gives direction to staff to be able to respond throughout the legislative session when any issue comes up relative to our agenda. So rather than needing to call a meeting of the council and get approval to step forward and testify, this gives staff that ability to testify. Since the creation of this commission, the council each year has asked that the EDC review those parts of the legislative agenda that have something to do with development or redevelopment, and those items were called out and were in your background. For the most part, those items are actually very similar and in many cases exactly the same as they were last year when you saw this. At this time, your possible actions are to recommend that council approves that portion of their legislative agenda. If there's something on the agenda that you think they should not be moving forward with, you obviously have the opportunity now to bring that forth. And if there's something that you think should be on their legislative agenda, you can make comment regarding that. And when they meet to finalize their agenda, they can take that under consideration also. And with that, I would certainly stand for questions, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Manhouse. I had a question on the state property tax one, number 3. Can you explain the reasoning behind that one?
That one I'm going to defer to Ms. Faulkner.
Let me just read this. And it says the City of Burnsville opposes the extension of state-levied property taxes to additional classes of property and/or the increase in taxation levels on the present state property tax. I believe this just gets to general increasing in property taxes or expansion of state property taxes. Historically,
On state property.
no, on all properties.
On all property.
On
The
all
state
property.
tax levy. A portion of the taxes that are paid go to state coffers, not just city, county, school district. I believe that change was made in 2001, and particularly to commercial and industrial properties. So we are opposed to any increases to that state levy.
Any other questions? Mr. Sturts?
Mr. Chair, Skip, number 1, the fiscal disparities. Just curious as to has that had any changes over the years, or you know, in your knowledge, or Jenny, do you know of any potential or proposed changes to that coming?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, to my knowledge, there has been no changes to the fiscal disparity law. Obviously, this agenda is prior to the session, so we don't know what they would have in mind to discuss. We are on the negative side of fiscal disparities, which means we basically pay in and get nothing back. Obviously, we'd like to see that be a more equitable solution. And it somewhat ties into number 2, which is local government aid. We receive absolutely no local government aid. So a portion of our tax base goes to assist other cities that don't have as strong a tax base. So obviously, both of those put our residents and our businesses in a somewhat negative capacity, and they were both established a long time ago. And we're advocating that they be reviewed and looked at as to create a more equitable solution between those of us who are consistently paying in and those who are consistently taking out.
And so along those lines, the fact that they are listed here in the legislative agenda, that indicates that there will be some active advocacy for these positions. Is that
This indicates that if different organizations that we belong to actively lobby, that we would work with them and lobby on their
Okay,
behalf.
so we wouldn't necessarily do it on our own?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
This is not something that council is going to embrace and walk the halls of the legislature. They are basically giving staff direction to assist when, for example, the League of Minnesota Cities lobbies on one of these issues.
Okay, thank you, Skip.
Commissioner Clippy?
Yes, I have a question on number 6. This appears to say you're okay with the current Met Council interference in city planning. You just don't want to have anything that makes it worse. Am I reading that right? Is this an issue with Met Council having issues that or not?
No, Commissioners, this number 6 relates to local land use controls, and
Okay.
it seems in every session there's a law or two that comes up that affects the city's ability to enforce its zoning regulation. This is more of a zoning
Oh,
regulations,
zoning issue,
and
okay.
zoning rules have to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So,
Yes.
in essence, depending on what they were proposing to do, it could impede the ability for us to implement the comprehensive plan.
Okay. So nothing with the
Nothing directly related to that, to the Met Council. I'll give you an example of this. I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe in the last session, this might even come up again. There was a proposal to have people who rent out their homes on a lake be exempt from any licensing requirements, even if it was like a hotel or a bed and breakfast. You have different people in there every weekend. At the local level, we think that's a local decision because the neighbors have an impact, they're impacted, or they may have a say, is it a business, is it a residential? So the law that was proposed would basically prohibit the city from regulating somebody from renting out their home, whether it be for 1 day, 1 week, or a month. Well, at what point is it a business in a commercial or commercial use in a residential zone? So we just want to be able to make that decision at the local level rather than having the state exempt certain zoning and land use types of controls.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Commissioner Search, do you have anything further? No. Okay. Do we have a recommendation for the council on this?
Yeah, I would make a motion for that. That also includes the city legislative initiatives as well? Yeah,
Yes, it does, Mr. Chair.
yes.
We concur with what you're saying. We can concur with what they put down there at this point, and we have no questions against it. Am I saying that half right?
A quick question on number 9. Does that enabling legislation, is that needed to be passed by the state of Minnesota in order for the city to better empower to administer those things, to administer fines rather than to take people to court? Is that something you're going to seek legislative?
Commissioners, yes, it is. It's something that we've been working on as a HIP initiative, which is an initiative of counties in, or cities in Dakota County, and this is something that we started last year. Burnsville is a statutory city, as are many other cities in the county, as opposed to charter rule cities.
Right.
And therefore, the rules that we're bound by have been adopted by statute. They do not allow us to have an administrative court or to assess fines and civil penalties. So we resolve property maintenance issues by going to district court, and so the outcome is longer. It
Yeah.
takes a lot, and it may not always be to the benefit of the property
Yeah.
owner either when people are getting warrants because they don't show up for court and stuff. So
Yep.
again, we want to make this easier for property owners and for the city.
Highly support this. So I stand on my motion as, make the motion?
Okay, if you've got that, Skip.
You need a second, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We now have updates, and I believe
That's mine also, Mr. Chair.
yes, sir.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, 2 updates. The first one, in your background material, we did provide you with the activities relative to the Burnsville STEM Alliance for the last 2 months, September and October. I won't go through all of them, but I would just draw your attention to the last 2 items on there. A couple of weeks ago, there was a county-wide economic development seminar. The Dakota County CDA, the chambers in the county, and all the cities in the county all participated in this event. There were about 150 businesses in attendance. Due to a sponsorship from U.S. Bank, we were able to secure Mike Veck, owner of the St. Paul Saints, as the featured speaker, and then we had a panel of Dakota County businesses that had accessed various economic development services provided in and by the county. The meeting got exceptional reviews from the participants, and we are in discussion actually right now, the cities and the chambers and the CDA, of doing something similar again sometime next year. But it was very well received. The last item on there, about 2 weeks ago, the city did participate in the annual Medical Device and Manufacturing Show, a 2-day show down at the Convention Center. To have a booth at that show was rather expensive. So for the last few years, we have partnered with various groups. This year, we partnered with Greater MSP, which you may recall is the regional marketing arm of the region. Life Science Alley, which is a 600-member association for the bioscience industry. Apex, which is the economic development group up in northern Minnesota. It's a privately funded development group. DEED, which obviously is the state economic development, and then Anoka County, and then the city of Burnsville. We're very proud of the fact that we were the only city partnering in the booth, and actually we were the only city at the show out of 700 booths. We did make a number of very good contacts, which hopefully down the line will pay off for us. But more importantly, it did allow us a lot of time with the people we partnered with in the booth, which is equally, we think, important to us because they are marketing on a much greater scope than we are. I just wanted to point those two out to you. The other update I just need to bring to your attention is you probably saw some articles in the newspaper about the potential sale of the AAA land. We are actually in that process. We are working with the purchaser. The purchasing entity actually has a draft purchase agreement and development contract. We were hoping that they would have had enough time to review it and that we could actually have brought it to you at this meeting for your review and recommendation. The developer that we are working with is a highly successful hotel developer who actually has had about 6 hotels open up this year. So as you can imagine, they are extremely busy, and because of that busy schedule they have, they were not able to complete their review in time. There is the possibility that if they are able to complete the review in the next week or two, we may ask you to come in for a special meeting in December. So I just need to bring that to your attention. We probably would be looking at December 12th. If it doesn't happen by then we would expect it would be on your agenda in January on your normally scheduled meeting, which off the top of my head I don't remember what day it is in January. But if you could just kind of know that you might be called to come in on December 12th. And
Let's hope that works.
We do too. And we would certainly give you notice. We would know probably right after Thanksgiving if we're going to do that, but just so you're aware of that. That's the only 2 really updates that we needed to bring forth, Mr. Chair.
Skip, any idea as to the brand or type of hotel that this company might develop at that site?
Commissioner Sturts, at this point, they are in final negotiations with that brand, so they have asked us to keep that confidential until those negotiations are completed.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments, commissioners? Okay, we move for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Very good.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, gentlemen.